The trail systems of northern Minnesota are a source of identity and pride for many people in the Arrowhead region. This diverse and impressive network of trails is alive and teeming with activity year-round and is a destination for local, national, and international outdoor enthusiasts. The recreational trails that we have today can be traced back to economies that shaped the Northlands, from native trade routes to the French fur trappers, the timber industry, and the iron mines. These industries laid the foundation for what has quickly become one of the nation's premier recreational trail systems. Hi, I'm Paul Lajeunesse. I'm an assistant professor of art at the College of St. Scholastica here in Duluth, Minnesota. My life as a professional artist and academic has taken me from St. Louis, Missouri to Ohio, Oregon, Georgia, Tennessee. I've lived in France and in Iceland, and I'm now able to call Minnesota my home. Join me as I go on an adventure and explore the Mesabi and Gunflint trails.
My name's George. I'm going to be your conductor on today's trolley. And up front is our motorman, Jim. So say hi to Jim. He's going to take us down the tracks today.
Hi, Jim.
The Mesabi Trail is an incredible asset. It's an incredible resource for this area. If you know any of the history of the Iron Range, we have a history of boom and bust. Tourism is one of the constants that we can depend on here on the Iron Range.
The Arrowhead of Minnesota and the Gunflint Trail is pretty special, pretty unique area. There's nothing like it.
People are a little nuts, you know. When I got ready to retire and said I was moving to northern Minnesota, I said, no, you should go to Arizona.
We're just average working class people, and it's never been.
Glad you pointed that out. They wouldn't have known that.
How many miles can you get on one tank?
Some of those machines are pushing 200.
Good Lord.
I am not a handyman, but I had to be. And Mother was the brains and I was the brawn. And that was such as it was. So there wasn't a lot of brawn.
My title is a forest archaeologist, which is, one of those rare occurrences where an anthropology major actually has, gainful employment.
Gang, this was the first mine in the state. And as I mentioned to you all before, over 80% of all domestic iron ore production comes from Minnesota. It's our culture, it's our economy, it's what we do. You're welcome. We have a very tight schedule that we need to maintain based on the movements of that hoist. So when it's leaving, so are we. When we are done in here, we're going out to that head frame. We're going to get into a cage, not an elevator, a cage, and be lowered just over 2,300 feet. That's almost a half a mile. The ride down is noisy, it's bumpy, it's shaky, it's authentic, it's very safe. Backs to the back wall, gang, face the front. Very good. Everybody doing okay?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Good enough.
Thank you, sir. Gang, it's a little bit below, so step up and come on out. Follow me. How many in your group, sir? With drills and explosives, we worked our way out to this point. We came up this 25, 26 feet, and we slice out in all directions until we run into something that is not iron ore. The ore that we are after, gang, is this sparkly gunmetal blue stuff above me. A lot of people think iron ore is red, and some of it is. And the red that you see right there is the result of the drilling and blasting process, and maybe I'm already going too far for some of you. If you ever owned a mid-70s Ford vehicle, you already know all about that. Yep. The white is corrosion left over from the blasting. If not you, who? Who were the men who mined this ore, that made the steel, that makes the steel, that makes everything else you've got? They were immigrants. In 1905, 80% of our workforce is foreign born. Immigrants. where would we be, gang? What if we were treating them the way we do today? I can tell you that my father and most of these fathers did not want their kids working in the mine. My dad would be very disappointed to find me still working in a mine. When I was leaving the taconite industry, I had to write it to him because his hearing stayed in the bottom of the spruce mine under Evelyn, Minnesota. And all he had to say was, well, it's about time. It's education. That's what they are pushing for us. Okay, we're ready. Watch your step coming out, gang. Once you're clear, take those hats off, crank them all the way wide open for us, please. Leave them upside down on the long counter in the hat room, and if you would, point those hats west. The only solution is to figure out how to do it without those negative environmental impacts.
Right.
Because we're not going to stop mining. That's proven.
It almost seems like it's ratcheting up with the way technologies are changing and the
demand.
ubiquitousness nature of
Every other month, you're going to hear some government, whether it's regional, local, or beyond, say, well, we need to increase the amount of renewable energy that we can provide by X percentage points. That requires all of these metals that they're talking about right now.
That's right.
And we have to be cognizant of the fact that within 20 miles of where we're shooting this right now, we contribute to 3 of the major watersheds for this continent.
Right.
Our water's going to Hudson's Bay.
Yeah.
Right over there, it's down the Great Lakes. And right over there, right on the far side of those gray hills, which are all taconite dumps, it's going down the Mississippi.
Right, of course.
We don't want to send something to somebody else that they wouldn't want to get.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi, good.
Good.
Well, welcome to the Minnesota Discovery Center's trolley. You have the honor of riding the last 1 o'clock trolley for the season.
The Discovery Center exists to interpret Minnesota's Iron Range in an economic way, political way, social, historical.
Now we're going down into the Pillsbury mine. The Pillsbury mine was established and started shipping iron ore in 1898, and it was owned by John Pillsbury. Now John Pillsbury was the same Pillsbury from Pillsbury Baking and the governor of Minnesota for 3 terms, as I understand. We had a very unique situation up here on the Iron Range, and that was that we had iron ore that was plentiful and relatively easy to mine on the Mesabi Range. That was discovered in the late 1800s. And the mines were actually discovered and operating before Minnesota had built any roads up here. There was 2 trails up here, one from Duluth called the Vermilion Trail, that went up to Lake Vermilion, and one that went east and west called the Mesabi Trail. And these were pretty nasty mud trails. The equipment that you see surrounding that water tower is 1950s era natural iron ore mining equipment, which is much smaller than the taconite mining equipment we use today.
When you get into these spaces, you really think about the conditions, and inside of this small chamber, it's completely filled with a motor, and you just have to imagine what it would be like to operate this thing all day, and how these people must not be able to hear after a couple of years. You really start to sympathize with the people with these working conditions in order to just even get this raw material out of here. There's also not much space. The housing inside of these machines, I'm sure inside of the mines, I just get a real sense of claustrophobia about being in any of this stuff, or I think I would kind of lose my mind. People are tough though, they stick it out, and You're an immigrant from another country and you need to feed your family, so you just suck it up and do it. You know, you move across the world to this, you have to make it work.
Well, of course, and they were promised a lot of things when they were moved over here that didn't take place. The streets were paved with gold, and whoops, it wasn't quite that way, because they had figured they'd come over here and make fortune and then go back to the old country, But it didn't work out that way.
Get over here and shove you down in a hole. Go down there.
Yeah, really, and you had to buy all your own equipment, even right down to the dynamite.
Where am I going to go? What would
I would start right around the corner here.
And then, so there were strikes in 1907 and 1916.
It was, to some extent, segregated, and that's the way the mining companies liked it, because then you could put people from different races or ethnicities on the same crew and they couldn't talk to one another, so they couldn't do things like union organizing. As a labor historian, I've studied a lot of the immigration patterns, but also the way that immigrants were treated, especially in the workplace. And it was a difficult life on the Iron Range. There were a lot of deaths. In 1906 alone, there were over 100 people that died in area mines.
Wow. A lot of kids, a lot of 18 to 23-year-olds.
The immigrants here were not expensive. They were interchangeable parts in an industrial machine. And until World War I, they could just be replaced by the next ones who came in off the boat. After World War I, that all changed. Especially during the war, that immigration pipeline was shut off. And so suddenly they were more valuable. The first strike on the Mesabi took place in 1907, and they lost that one. But they put up the fight. 1916 was a different story. They worked together across ethnic lines. It was the beginning of the notion that the people up here were fighting the same battles.
The 16 strike was really unique because it pitted organized labor through the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, against the largest corporation in the United States of America at that time, and it was the first in 1901, billion-dollar corporation, United States Steel. And so you had this group of immigrants organized by the IWW taking on the largest corporation. And for a time in 1916, they were winning. And it was a fiercely pitched battle. And because I'm a historian and maybe a little bit of a romantic in some senses, one of my favorite parts of the Mesabi Trail is when I bike around the St. James Mine Pit in Aurora, because that is where the 1916 strike started. And so you can bike around that pit today and know that there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Greene who walked out of that mine, laid down his tools, and started the 1916 strike. I mean, that's the type of history that exists on the Mesabi Trail.
Agitator. The immigrant population that came here and worked in these extraordinarily difficult conditions. And I keep thinking about what winter was like. Limited light, a lot of snow, a lot of ice. And the native population had been here for many, many years prior to that. And so it makes me think about, getting out of that European, Eurocentric mindset of what life was like here. People were navigating the difficult weather and living conditions for centuries prior to that.
The history, as far as a written record goes, up here is fairly short, right? I mean, you have some of the first accounts of this area coming out in written history from, French explorers like Le Vérendrye in the 1730s, 1740s, right? But if you look at history from a different angle, whether it be from Ojibwe oral history or from archaeology, the history is deep here, you know, right? And it does go back to, you know, we have evidence of folks utilizing northeastern Minnesota, you know, 10,500 years ago, right? So right on the heels of the retreat of the last glacial advance, you know, we have people using resources and living on the landscape up here.
Would this be referencing wild rice?
We have the land, water, we have the ducks. Net Lake, like I said, is our wild rice lake. I'm Zungwe Benesik, Martha Anderson. I'm the Visitor Services Manager here. We usually start off with talking about our Ojibwe migration. It depicts a sacred journey that drew the original Ojibwe people from their home on the Atlantic seaboard through the Great Lakes to the forests in the northeastern Minnesota.
The story, you know, on the East Coast is that an individual, an elder, a spiritual advisor, received a vision where he was told to gather everyone who would come and move westward looking for the food that grows on water, or menomen, wild rice.
With this red line, it's kind of showing that the routes that they traveled. And this journey, I mean, it took over like 500 years.
Right.
These are stopping places along the way. All these little with turtle-shaped island, Niagara Falls, sure. Detroit River, Manitoulin Island. So we had 7 stopping places along the way here. Our Boisfort history and our culture needs to be passed on down to our younger generations. And the reason why we do that is so that they can carry that on down. This part of our museum is we're getting into the dark era. This is where families start getting torn apart. Young children are being forcibly taken from their families, their mothers, their fathers. The whole goal of it is to colonize. They want us to be like them. A lot that happened in the boarding schools, a lot of our people suffered hard. There's just been different ways of discipline, abuse. There's a lot of stuff that's happened to them, which actually kind of even runs down into the generations now. How does that term go? It takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. So that's the way we are. We have our young ones always growing up with the grandparents. The grandparents are teaching that culture and that history and our traditional ways. Everybody in the community kind of helped each other raise children and take care of each other. I always kind of like to think that they're tight-knit communities.
Right. Do you feel like this museum helped get you connected in your community a little bit more deeply?
Mm-hmm. I do. It's for everybody.
It's for everybody, yeah. I mean, it's been wonderful to be a guest here and get this private tour of this space. Is outstanding.
On the Iron Range, we sometimes have a little bit of a provincial attitude because we've got all these little towns. The one thing that's special and unique about the Mesabi Trails, it strings everybody together. So right now we have about 135 miles complete. When totally done, it'll be 155 miles. And at that point, we will string together 28 little communities, from Grand Rapids to Ely, from the Mississippi to the Boundary Waters. And to be able to travel that whole trail, you actually pass through a lot of these little communities. So it brings resources, tourism dollars to those little communities, but it also makes people aware of the Iron Range and all of our wonderful little communities.
The actual trail that exists today that we know as the Mesabi Trail really began in 1986.
Any public lands that fall within their mining activities, that includes fallout from their smokestacks, dust, fallout. If it falls within a certain radius, there's a public use in there.
At the time, you know, it looked like a big venture, 132 miles in length.
A major long segment of the Mesabi Trail in place, which would then be the attraction, the gravitational pull for getting people coming in from Lord knows where they may come from.
James Obastar was probably a key link in that because he liked to bike.
Jim was an avid, I would almost say a rabid cyclist. Oh my God, he loved to bike. And anybody who knew him knew how much he liked to bike. And even in his elder years, I know a lot of people couldn't even keep up with him once he got out there on his bike.
He was long and respected in the U.S. Congress, and so he could get things done both on a national level and locally. And his love for biking really gave the movement to establish the trail some steam.
It was kind of the brainchild of another gal. Her name is Liz Prebich. Liz was a county commissioner. She passed away, unfortunately, at a very young age. But she and Jim, this was kind of their passion, their idea. You know, so it's really fun for those of us who have been involved with the trail for a while to think back to those folks who are part of our legacy, but those folks who helped build this crazy thing.
In the 1980s, there was a movement to put old railroads and railroad grades back to use, converting them into trails for the public.
They were trying to find a way to make them viable again. They knew the trains weren't coming back, so we have to do something with them. There's this infrastructure there, and we're not using it. How do we take it and make it into an economic driver?
It was up to us to kind of figure out, well, how do we get community A and B connected? You know, again, going back to the old rail corridors that existed at one time. A real hodgepodge of these corridors that we kind of, you know, gathered together. And we could get close to community sometime, but, you know, like not through it. That's where the Mesabi Trail is a little bit different. We wanted to bring it into the communities, the points of interest, lakes, streams, ponds, creeks, and so forth. So it worked well where you can be on a railroad grade for a while, and then we get off of it for a while, and then back on one, then off of one. So it's about a 50-50 mix.
The Mesabi Trail is not flat and straight, okay? I like to tell some of our visitors it has a lot of topography.
Mesabi Trail infuses history by signage in many places. There's some interpretive signage that goes along the trail. There's also the opportunity to stop and talk to people, and that's probably one of the best resources for the Mesabi Trail. You know, you don't have to be blazing through it. It's nice to stop and smell the proverbial roses, but more likely maybe some pasty or something like that.
So we're at Carlson's Pasties in Bowabic, Minnesota, where I'm going to have the traditional pasty that has potatoes, carrots, onions, beef, pork, and salt, and rutabaga. Now, the history of this food, it's Welsh and English. Welsh, I believe, in its origin, and it's miners' food, and they would carry it in their pocket along down into the mine and would use the crust as kind of a handle. This one's a little bit lighter weight. Well, this is definitely a very hearty meal and easy to eat. It's delicious, it'll keep you going all day long.
It's really a sensory experience in many ways that is unlike anywhere else in Minnesota.
It's nice that the trail is going to hopefully keep you thriving, right?
Well, I like to keep people outside instead of playing computer games.
Let's look at some stuff. I wonder if I need, I know I want.
I mean, we're kind of lucky compared to living in Chicago. You got to drive 2 hours to get out of town.
I had the experience, I lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and you know, my favorite things to do were 2 hours away.
It gets people walking, it gets people biking. It's an economic driver for many of the communities.
So in exploring the Mesabi Trail and understanding the importance of bicycling on that trail, and you come into the Mesabi area during the winter and you find these fat tire bikes, these insanely big tires that are designed to drive over ice and snow, and they are highly effective tools for this job. And it's one of these inventions that kind of fits the landscape. Really fascinating, so we're going to give it a try. It's currently -5. It is not going to get warmer. So you really have to bundle up, and I'm not the only one out there. This is what these people do up here all winter long, and so you really understand the kind of relationship with the land, and cold doesn't stop you. So you find a lot of fun things to do all year long, and on the Mesabi trails, it's bicycling year-round.
As an avid rider of the Mesabi Trail, I reap the benefit of all the people who have come before, and the people that built the railroad grades, but also the people that maintain them now.
The passion that people have for the trail, for showing people a good time, making sure they're come up here and they're having fun and they're safe. They're out there on their bikes with their families. I don't know, it's a community. You know, we've created a community around this trail.
Trails are emblematic in that some of them started off as footpaths. Some of them then became interurban and streetcar, and then rail car that were hauling thousands of metric tons of iron ore, and now they're bikers and people who are walking on the trail again. It's really kind of come full circle, and it's done that in, you know, 200 to 300 years.
Trails, generally people refer to terrestrial trails, places where you're walking across the landscape. And, you know, long before Europeans arrived here, trails crisscrossed this land.
This is the museum for the Cook County Historical Society, and this used to be the lightkeeper's house. So everything came here by boat, pianos, livestock, visitors, mail. It was super busy. We even had some shipwrecks in the harbor here. So it's a really rich maritime history here. The first people that started arriving in the Grand Marais area was probably around the late 1800s. There were mining interests. There was the lumber, because you had cities being built, and who was going to supply them with all their lumber? Well, this was one of the areas with all the white pine forests. So you had people coming here to economically benefit from the land, and then you had people looking to settle, which here were primarily Scandinavians.
I think you still get this sense of the wildness of it. I think you still get some of the sense of it as a frontier almost, right? And certainly that's how the Gunflint Trail really originated. 19th century, you know, it was a frontier. It was a place where people in Duluth were hearing about the silver mines opening north of there in Canada along Whitefish Lake, and the big haul of silver coming off Silver Islet by Thunder Bay, and people were coming up there thinking that this was going to be the payout.
There was a lot of exploration. This whole area has been, every inch of it, you think it's pristine wilderness, well, every inch of it has been traversed by somebody looking for minerals.
The early Gunflint Trail was called Mayhew's Road or the Rove Lake Road. Mayhew had a post, a fur trade post, trading post that he was operating on Rove Lake by the early 1870s, mid 1870s, and he improved that, you know, that road. And again, by road, you're probably just talking about a place where you could maybe, you know, probably not even get a wagon up. It was a pack road, a tote road.
I think the name Gunflint Trail stimulates some thought of this must be something special. It has an appeal of pioneers, and I think that's got to be a reason for people wanting to come up here and find out what this is all about.
When I was a kid, I remember doing a road trip up there with my parents, and the concept of getting to the end of a road was not something that was in my mind, right? Like that you can drive and the road stops. And I remember being like 10 years old and asking my dad, I was like, well, why doesn't the road keep going? He's like, hey, it's the end of the road.
it's kind of interesting that people will drive 57 miles to get up here to find this place, you know. It's become a destination more than just a place to go fishing.
And we're right in this little bay here of Sagnaga Lake.
And Grand Portage is
way
over east. Over in this.
Yeah, because I mean, they tried to do the iron ore, and unfortunately that did not work. They didn't have a good test quality or knowledge.
I would say fortunately it didn't work out.
Right, exactly.
Because right now you have something very unique. Just even the drive up in here, like, this doesn't look like any place I've ever been.
Our entire purpose was to tell the cultural and natural history of the Gunflint Trail.
The largest mammal that you're going to find in this building, and you have to pretty much be standing underneath it in order to find it. The first resort was log, and it was built out by the main gate, and that would have been in 1931. And then after a couple years, then they decided, no, maybe we should move the lodge closer to the water. The owners were unpacking the dishes and getting ready for the guests to come. The dog came in, knocked over the oil lamp, and burnt it down to the ground. So then they decided, okay, we need to be resourceful, and that was Art and Ed Nunstead, the father and son. During the Depression time, they thought, how can we rebuild? So then they collected all the stone for this building from this area, got some local outer work stonemasons to come up from Grand Marais and build the structure that we have today.
Just don't really know about and hear much about trapping as a viable means of income past the Industrial Revolution, and it's interesting, like, so resorts, trapping.
The owners, actually, the resorts in the wintertime, that's how they were to sustain. Once, you know, after the resort was closed, they needed a way to, you know, have their money, and so a lot of them would go out and trap. Some of the commercials were shot here on property, so this is right out front here. That's Sasha the Bear, and that is Earl Hammond. And in order for the canoe to stay flat like this, there was reports that he put cement sacks underneath Earl's seat to keep the canoe level, because otherwise Sasha, I guess, was like a 200 or 300 pound grizzly bear. In 2007, there was 9 members of the Gunflint Trail Historic Society that were looking for property to, hey, maybe we could do a museum, and they found this old building just sitting here empty, not being used at all. And it was in dire straits. I mean, it was not in good shape at all.
Inhabited by a lot of wildlife.
Yeah, and the doors were left open.
Oh.
At that time, the Forest Service wasn't sure what they were going to do with the facility. There was even talk that they might tear the facility down. And that even enhanced the local interest in preserving the facility.
It was really a partnership of local folks up the Gunflint Trail that developed a 501(c) that saw in that structure, A, a manifestation of kind of the early resort history in the Gunflint Trail, and B, a place to interpret that to the public. And so I think that's where the Forest Service, a case study of where they succeed in that public interpretation piece is partnering with other organizations. So Chickawauk Lodge is it's a great example of that.
Today we drove up the Gunflint Trail and to the Chickawauk Center. We're now at the Gunflint Lodge, which is located on Gunflint Lake. The Chickawauk Center is a really well-designed and well-maintained interpretive center and museum that gives a great history of the founding and development of the Gunflint Trail and the Gunflint location in terms of a tourist destination. And it was fascinating to find out that it was developed in the 1930s as a hunting, fishing, resort and getaway. So for me to find out that when it was developed was really quite a surprise, just thinking that that type of private construction and development for recreation was still happening at a time when I would have expected people just simply wouldn't have disposable income, nor would they have the means to build and develop without large bank loans to make that kind of a large-scale resort. But they also, you could tell, did a lot of work on their own. So it seems as though they obtained the property And it was just a really hardy group of people that knew how to do everything. There's a level of humility and respect, so the things that they made were well made, but naturally fit into the landscape. And you can see the original buildings that are still here really are suited for the landscape. You don't find that kind of architectural hubris that you sometimes see where a building looks completely out of place. Here, everything feels quite natural and subtle and part of the landscape.
You had the wood on site to build, so it wasn't a huge investment, and you could create this rustic villa. And people from all over would come by boat or by new road.
There were very, very few tourists at that point. And what tourists at first came were totally fishermen, hardcore fishermen. It was outdoor biffies, a wood stove, and a lumberjack meal, and fish to beat hell. And it was all lake trout, because the only two native species we had up here were lake trout and northern pike.
In the 20s, this was.
So you got Gunflint Lake, got the lodge, the Narrows into to Magnetic Lake, and then we've got Gallagher's Island over at Magnetic Lake, which is kind of a pretty little island. You know, how did your family end up coming up here? What was why did they choose to come up here?
Well, my grandparents and my mother lived outside of Chicago, and they vacationed in Wisconsin, which was as far up as recreation had kind of gotten with the development of the trains and some of the lakes that were the recreational destinations of the time. And I think they stayed at Lighthouse Lodge, didn't they?
They had some cabins they rented at
Lake
Zurich.
Yeah, Lake
at
Zurich.
Lake Zurich, which is not Lighthouse Lodge. It's nowhere
They
near.
owned and rented out to
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
And then they became friends with the Blankenberg family.
Next door neighbors at
Yep.
Lake Zurich.
And those people from Chicago had kind of a game they played each year about who had gotten the furthest north and had an adventure that their compatriots had not. So they had talking material all winter to be one up on that aspect of social conversation. They got up there one summer, and all of a sudden the Blankenberg started talking about having coming north to Minnesota that there was a new area just opening up, and that he was exploring the Gunflint Trail and the northeastern Minnesota and the wilderness.
In her book, Woman of the Boundary Waters, Bruce's mother, Justine Kerfoot, writes, "I don't know when I first knew I was in love with this sometimes harsh and demanding land. Did I fall in love in winter, when the snow was cold and crunchy as one pads along on snowshoes? When in the early morning the rising sun reflects on the hoarfrost, and each separate branch and tree in the woods stands as if covered with jewels? As I snowshoe across the lake, the wind stings my cheeks, leaving them tinted, glowing red. The snowshoes swish steadily over the crust in perfect rhythm with my swinging arms. As I rest a moment and look down the lake, the Sawtooth Mountains present a jagged outline, their slopes covered with timber and their cliff-like faces heavy with frost and snow. I don't know when, but the fact remains that I did fall in love, an infinitesimal speck in the cosmos. I stood on the shore of Gunflint Lake beneath a great white pine, matriarch of a fast-vanishing tribe, and I knew I was home. I was 21. The year was 1927.
She talks about the natives that lived across Gunflint Lake, and how she learned to survive up here was those natives. And they had taught her how to trap and how to handle the winters up here.
They, so to speak, introduced Mom to the wilderness and helped keep her out of trouble. And they helped her create her first team of dogs, which they didn't have a clue about, her mother didn't have a clue about. But she got some dogs from the Indians and some from other places and created a dog team to get around in the wintertime.
This is the coolest thing I've seen. This is great. It's going to get even cooler. Yeah, I can't wait to see it take off.
In itself, yeah. The male used to
to be carried this way, like far distances.
So is that
mail
the,
run.
That's how they get the name.
The race is called the mail run, and so it's a historic route.
We spend a lot of time taking care of the dogs. That's pretty much our second job.
Okay.
The musher will be doing anything from waiting on the sled to go to usually they get here early enough so they can have somebody else stand on the sled and then walk the line and make sure everybody's in the right spot, kind of get them excited, make sure they've got a good attitude in mind.
It started back in the 70s, and actually one of the guys that actually started it back in the 70s is our race marshal.
When I was one of the two guys who went to Bruce Kerfoot at the Gunflint Lodge and said, "What do you think about starting a race at your lodge here?" Well, then the ground there, and he says, "That's a good idea."
Yeah. How many participants are there now?
There's 31 teams here today.
Holy smokes!
This is massive. The first class is the 12-mile class, and they're in here.
Okay.
And they're going to run about 50 miles today. And then they'll rest for 5 hours and do it again.
I followed my sister up here actually. She came up 80-something, 84 or something. Came up, my father brought her up on a trip in the winter, and she fell in love with it and moved here the next spring. Just picked up and moved up here. And that's back in 84. There wasn't a lot of people that lived up here. There was very little, if any, full-time work.
Right.
And there were hardly any neighbors. So it was really, really isolated at that time.
At the age I moved up here, I just turned 25. It was, I'm going to have to go to school. I'm going to have to make a professional decision here. And then I came up here and I thought, oh, I don't have to. Because I know how to work.
Right.
And that's all that mattered here. And I have worked ever since, and I worked really hard, and I've worked 2 and 3 jobs and had a couple businesses at work. I mean, none of it mattered because it was all worth it. It's all worth it.
I don't know, I just graduated from college, and, I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet, figuring it out, but I feel like there's so much time you have to fit this stuff in, and why not, throw yourself out there and just try something new.
I like the challenge of it too. Every day there's something new that you're coming across, and to be able to look back at all the challenges that you've overcome is really rewarding. Know that you've come this far and makes other things look like small hiccups in the road later on.
We didn't have any money. We were waitresses here.
Okay.
It was just to a point where there wasn't enough full-time work. I couldn't stay here any longer. I was trying to figure out what to do, and I didn't want to leave the area. So we contacted a seasonal homeowner up here who had talked about wanting to own a resort up here. So we actually faxed him and said, "Hey, you want to be partners? We don't have any money.
Want to be a silent
and you need to be silent, but do you want to be partners?" And he said yes.
No kidding.
And that's how we bought that.
And we couldn't believe it.
Really, yeah.
With no money invested, it was just labor. Sarah worked 24 hours a day.
I like having to work to live. Like
Yeah.
I enjoy having to shovel myself home. And work not in the conventional sense, but in I live in a dry cabin and have to haul water and build a fire to stay warm. I enjoy that challenge.
Most of my employees are college educated. They just want to live here, So they wait tables so they can live on the Gunflint Trail.
The things we've really become interested in are the history of what brought people here, and then the things that have allowed people to stay. And so your lumber mill is a wonderful example. And so if you could just kind of talk us through maybe the brief history.
It was established by my grandfather in 1914, so we're starting our 105th year in business here.
Wow.
And all the products are used. Like I say, all the chips go to a paper mill. What bark and sawdust we don't burn here goes to other markets. So that's the pack of lumber ready for going in the dry kiln. Yeah. And back in the earlier days, there was a seasonal operation where the mill ran in the summer. They'd move the crew out to the woods and log in the winter, and then come back and
So they did it all.
Yeah. So now we're going to go into the mill to be a little noisy.
Okay.
So wood's coming in from outside.
So as the log's going through, it's rotating it as it's peeling it?
No, the grater arms go around the log.
It goes around the log.
Stationary,
Almost like an apple peeler or something. Oh, wow.
It goes through the debarker, and then we have a two-sided mill. So we take the bigger wood and go through a conventional carriage and head rig. You know, we're going to load the carriage, and the carriage holds the log, and it goes in front of the saw and takes off a board at a time.
You know, right in there in the machine doing the work.
Yeah, it's real work, yeah. It takes a skill set. I mean, I tell people when they come to work here, I mean, it's old-fashioned work. I mean, it isn't, you know, you don't sit on a computer or play video games. It's real work. We use the profile head.
Oh, wow.
We make log siding.
Oh, that's right, sure.
The whole lumber industry moved from the East Coast, Maine, you know, across. They jumped over to Michigan and then into Wisconsin and Minnesota because wood was the product they had back then. A lot of land was logged and cut over because people wanted to farm. You know, so they had to eat and they had to build houses. And you know, all the big cities were growing at the time. Like, you know, the Great Chicago Fire, you know, wiped out most of the city, and they had to rebuild it. That was during the heyday of the lumbering, you know, here. So a lot of that wood got, you know, run into Chicago. Not only do you have to have the saws sharp, but you have to have them properly tensioned. Otherwise, they won't hang on the wheel. It takes constant attention just to make sure there's no lumps in it. And the tension's correct. It takes some active management, especially if you're going to live around forest areas or breathe air. I mean, it makes a lot of smoke and lots of bad things when you burn that much wood. The width and the thickness and the grade all determine where it ends up in the sorter. It takes a lot of money to manage a forest. So if you manage the forest by taking product off the forest, that covers the cost of doing the work and actually, you know, returns money to the landowner. As she still input
This is a sizable operation. It's been going for a long time. And these are the kinds of things that, you know, you come into Grand Marais, you come driving up the North Shore, and you think like, oh, it's, you know, kind of a nice way of life. But then you find like this really thriving industry here that it supports people to be able to live here. And I think it's great.
Yeah, we hire about 35 or so, plus supports, you know, a community of loggers and truckers, and which probably equals that or more.
Yeah, it expands out from there.
Yeah.
You know, most of our trail system here were originally logging roads.
At one time, the Gunflint Trail used to end here, because this used to be called Gateway Hungry Jack Lodge. So it was gateway to the wilderness. Born and raised at the lodge here. The lodge has been in my family since right around 1970. Well, my dad, a Duluth native, grew up coming up to the Gunflint Trail area as a kid, and as he grew up, for hunting and fishing was kind of his draw to the area. And opportunity presented itself with getting involved in this place, and here we are coming up on 50 years later. We're also located on the Gunflint Trail snowmobile system managed by the local Cook County Snowmobile Club. They manage about 150 miles of local trails here that access from the Canadian border all the way down to the North Shore and beyond, down to Duluth and up to the Iron Range as well.
So this trail system will actually connect all the way to Duluth?
Correct.
Holy
yep.
smokes, I didn't realize that.
There is some great history here in Minnesota due to Edgar Hattin, who was kind of the founder of Polaris and Arctic Cat.
Okay. I didn't know those were Minnesota companies.
Yeah, Thief River Falls and Roseau, Minnesota.
Oh, no kidding.
I'll send you guys out and check out this trail right here. Now you're going to get a variety of hills and rolling hills, and I mean, you're going to change in elevation, and you know, you're just going to be going basically through the edge of the wilderness. A lot of my customers don't stay here. They ride in from Grand Portage, Grand Marais, Lutsen, Tofty, Duluth, Cloquet, Ely, the whole right on down the line. You know, so they want somewhere to go. They need a reason. So the reason is to come and get gas and have a bite to eat and go on to the next. You know, if this trail system didn't exist, I mean, I don't know if I would be open in the wintertime. Right. You know, back before snowmobiling what it was, back in, you know, the 70s, I think the winters were a little more bleak.
Pretty lean, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I've mentored a lot of people, you know. But I mean, it's to me, it's not a job, it is a lifestyle.
Not only our guests, not only ourselves, but the people, the residents in the area share so many of the things that we feel. That's why they're long-term residents of the area.
Well, and the trail is a community. Back when you were growing up, the Indians across the lake, but even now, the people who are year-round residents here and the seasonal people, it's a very close community.
It's fun how they all develop basically the same approach to the setting, because everything is not totally scripted or ruled by rules up here. So take this lake, no horsepower limits, and no restrictions on what you can do. So theoretically jet skis are allowed. And they are, I mean, they're permitted. And sailing and speed boats and water skiing and all that. But you know, over the years, we have had an occasional guest bring their little Sea-Doo or something, and they jump on it, and first off, I tell them they can't be around the dock. So that means they gotta go over there somewhere else where it's not much fun, because there's nobody to show off to. But very quickly, they get the message, without our saying that you can't do anything, all of a sudden we realize that they do not bring it back, because they realize that's not the appropriate way. And our neighbors are the same way. Motors up to 25 horse are pretty good for fishing. Anything beyond that is show and tell. Well, they don't come up here for show and tell, so nobody has big motor crafts. Nobody's racing around water skiing, because it's not in sync. And we just don't have to tell each other that. That's the value of our community, and we all kind of see it the same way.
The people that come into your life, specifically employees, it becomes a mentorship. And that is where our biggest work has been done in the past 25 years. In all of our businesses, that has been the most rewarding.
You know, I think the future of the trail, and for people that live around here all the time, is preservation of the historical character of the Gunflint Trail.
Still, it's pretty incredible that we have this right here in northern Minnesota.
Yeah.
Diverse range of like activities too. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it kind of surprises people when they walk up this way. It's not what you think of when you think of Minnesota.
When you talk about the evolution of trails, like that sometimes is how it works, right? You have a footpath that moves to a tote road, that moves to a wagon road, that moves to a railroad, to a gravel road, to a modern, you know, asphalt highway. And I think when you look at the Gunflint Trail, that depicts that evolution really well. Throughout Minnesota, that's the way transportation systems evolved in some cases, right? You know, but up here you have this little microcosm where you can still kind of see it.
Come out and see this adventure. This is the way life used to be. You know, even though we have terrific development around our great nation, it all had to start somewhere, and it started like it is right here.
The opportunity to just explore the trail system, a very specific thing, in a very specific part of Minnesota, has been extremely rewarding because of the things that you find when you quiet down and slow down and really look. And that's what this place offers. That's what this film can offer, is just a glimpse of what's there, and then hopefully will entice you to do the exact same thing and just really stop and slow down and appreciate what you have. Not just because of the history of it, but because of what is here and what the future will provide. Like, this is an extremely rewarding place. It offers a peace of mind that you simply can't get by going through your day-to-day operations. Come out here and be part of your land, be part of your home.
Sun is so